Things we mentioned in the past is the idea of kind of loading and how that's all going to work. That would absolutely be something that you'd be really careful about here, because some retail has a lot of garbage and a lot of sort of in and out. If you're talking about a small corner store, they're constantly having trucks pull in and load things to fill those shelves up. So making sure you're meeting the codes for those issues would be a big deal, because you could really anger a lot of the residential people pretty quickly if you weren't. And then one that we haven't talked about yet for this, but it seems like potentially important, is that you may have to follow certain historical codes. This is a potentially historical building. Now, we've already said that we're building up on top, so my guess is it doesn't meet the really strong issues of historical buildings. Like, you're probably not on a registered building here, because they probably wouldn't let us do extra floors on top if it was a historically registered building. But that doesn't mean that there aren't any historical aspects that we would have to be careful of. There might be a historic district that they're trying to maintain the facades of these buildings, or it might be that there are certain aspects that they treat historical buildings in slightly different ways. I know a number of cities around the country have sort of existing buildings fall into slightly different categories when they're historical in nature, and that they have slightly different ways that they allow you to kind of manipulate the code in order for it to make sense, because there are these existing things, and it doesn't make sense to tear everything down to start from scratch, and so they allow a little bit more leeway on these. So understanding whether you fall into those categories or not would be very important. The height would be important. In certain codes, you're probably right on the edge of whether this would count as a high-rise or not. And so you might find in some codes it's in this kind of 60 to 70 foot range. In a lot of places it's about 80 foot. In some places it's, I believe, in like 100 foot range, where a technical term of high-rise kicks in. The ones that I've always worked in have always been in 80 foot. And so there's a difference between doing a building at 78 feet than there is doing a building at 82 feet high. That subtle difference in the overall height actually kicks in quite a different set of codes in terms of how big stairwells, how the elevators are going to work, what the fire ratings are going to be. A whole series of different questions might come into play. So lots of different sort of potential issues we'd be concerned about here. All of the sort of the obvious ones, just getting people out in a fire or a panic. Making sure the building itself is going to be okay. So we're worried about the structure. If this is a heavy timber wood building, which an old loft building might be, well, that's going to be a slightly different set of issues than if it's, say, a steel building. One of the things you probably have talked about at some point in your career is the idea that heavy timber wood has that sort of fascinating capacity that as it burns, it'll char through the wood for about 3/4 of an inch or so, and then that char will actually protect the rest of the wood. So if we're talking about a fairly sizable column, maybe 8 by 8 or 10 by 10 or something like that, well, I'll have quite a bit of the wood still there protected by this char around it. Maybe the beams are 8 by 12s or something like that. Well, I'm going to char in, and quite a bit of the wood is going to still be there for that protection. And that building will then last for quite a long time as people can get out of the building, the fire alarm's going off, the firefighters can come in and they can see what's going on. With a steel building, if I don't have that steel protected, then as soon as it gets up to a certain temperature, that steel is just going to fail. And so one of the things that tells us is if we have a lot of exposed steel, we have to start being very careful about how that steel is being fire protected, either with wrapped drywall or intumescent paint, or putting concrete or masonry blocks around it. Something has to protect the steel. So again, just the fact that it's a historic building, I may find myself sort of having to sort of delve deep into the fire protection of these different materials. So clearly, if you're a firefighter, you'd rather run into a building that's heavy timber wood building than you would with a steel building. But eventually that wood will eventually burn. It's just that it's going to give a little bit of protection. And same thing with the steel. If I put some protection on it, well, it actually is likely to be just as safe as the wood. It's just the worry is when it gets to that certain temperature, it's just going to fail quickly. So there's all these sort of specific issues about an existing building like this that you would be concerned about. So historical aspects of the building, fire safety, making sure the egress paths work, kind of that debate back and forth between sprinklering and egress distance and fire rating level, all of that. The important idea of a mixed use and separating these things from one another so that whatever crazy thing is going on in the retail doesn't impact the residential, and some teenagers party in the residential doesn't burn down the retail. So you're always finding the specific sets of issues for any particular example of a project, and those issues are going to start to bubble forward, and you want to make sure those are on the design table early on and that you've thought it through from the beginning, so you're not having to add in suddenly a new structural system between the first floor and the second floor after the initial construction prices have already been made, or something along those lines. You want to make sure that stuff gets built in to the basic idea of the building. So you're always looking for what is the issue for this particular example type of project.